Morning, everyone. My name is Jody Bechtel, and I am the Deputy Director of Clark County's Department of Environment and Sustainability. And this morning, we are talking to you about rural development efforts under our Division of Air Quality. We serve as the Air Pollution Control Agency for Clark County. This screen shows you some of the contacts for this effort on ozone attainment. And particularly, we'll be talking about rural development and drafting of those rules today. Excuse me. So our first stakeholder meeting on this new non-attainment designation for ozone was held on January 12th. This workshop is one of 7 that we're hosting to review particular regulations we are looking to promulgate under our new moderate ozone attainment designation. These meetings are being recorded and can be found on our website. The link is on your screen here, but I will put it in the chat for folks to be able to access, again, a website that has this presentation and our January 12th, what day was that? The January presentation, January 12th presentation, and other information. At this meeting, we do expect to have time to address some of your questions. We're asking that you hold any verbal questions till the end, but you are welcome to type them into the chat. And you can raise your hand and we will get through as many questions as we can. If we don't have time to get through all of them, we will do our best to get answers back to you. So just a quick overview. In our January meeting, we reviewed the ozone situation we are facing. I'm not going to get into a lot of detail here. I do encourage you to watch the video or review the presentation from the meeting on the 12th for the specifics. We were in marginal non-attainment for ozone, with the current standard being 70 parts per billion. We have been bumped up to moderate non-attainment. This graph shows kind of the ozone design value trends over the last 20 years. As you can see, ozone has been trending downwards since the early 2000s, but we've kind of been stuck in that mid to low 70 parts per billion, and we need to get these numbers below 70 parts per billion to attain. So the bump up in classification requires that we achieve attainment by August 3rd, 2024. We must establish emission control requirements in a state implementation plan, including rule development on reasonably available control technology, a 15% rate of progress requirement, reducing our volatile organic compounds by 15%. And then we are required to enact contingency measures to enact if we are still failing to maintain. Under EPA's final bump up rule, they require us to submit a state implementation plan by the retroactive date of January 1st, 2023. Because we are working under a deadline that is passed, we need to get controls in place as soon as possible. And that is kind of what is setting this aggressive schedule. If we don't get these regulations and rules in place as soon as possible, we could be at risk that EPA would start a sanctions clock, which could lead to a loss of federal highway funds and other penalties. And it could also allow EPA to impose a federal implementation plan to implement control requirements. So we have identified these source categories as needing action and rulemaking. These actions and those on the next slide are the rules that we are considering and discussing in this series of workshops. We are additionally needing to show, again, I mentioned that 15% volatile organic compound emissions reduction over our baseline. That reduction is independent of emission reductions necessary to achieve attainment. As well, again, as I mentioned, we're required to have contingency measure rules on the books that would be triggered if we haven't reached attainment by that August 2024 date. These are the actions being considered for that 50% VOC reduction and a contingency. You'll notice that some of these overlap with the CTG RACT actions and rules from the previous slide, and those overlaps will be discussed in these workshops. We expect and hope not to have to implement all of these actions, and we will know for certain which are needed once our attainment model is completed, which we expect to have sometime toward the end of April. We are discussing all of these with stakeholders as if we are needing them all due to the tight schedule. So this table kind of just identifies and summarizes the statutory timelines we're working with. Again, EPA Region 9 is aware that the submission deadline is passed and therefore unrealistic. And DAQ, our Division of Air Quality, is working closely with the EPA to show good faith progress to develop the state implementation plan and adopt related regulations as expeditiously as possible in this year, 2023. We will review the expected rulemaking timelines in each of these workshops, which is based on an attempt to get these rules in place in the summer months, which is our most active ozone season when we have the most exceedances. And with that, I'm going to turn it over to Richard Beckstead, who will talk about our AIM coding rule potential.
Okay, I'm Richard Beckstead, and I've been with the county for a little over 20 years, and I'm the one that has put together the AIMS rule. And let me share my screen here. Okay. Can you see?
Yes.
Okay. Making sure that. See if I can get that. Okay. Okay, so we're going to be talking about architectural and industrial materials, the coatings, and this will be similar to what we talked about yesterday. This is going to be presented on the aggressive schedule that we had spoken about previously. It does sound like we are going to have some more discussions if those timelines are going to need to be changed. But that will be taking place after we get through with these initial workshops. What we're going to be covering today are the topics that are shown here. We'll just go through those very quickly, and let's move on. The purpose of our meeting today is to discuss the fact that Clark County has recently been changed from marginal to moderate non-attainment for ozone for the 2015 standard. This rule is one of the rules for the 15% rate of the 15% rate in order to get started with all of the reductions that we're going to have to put into place. We are taking the approach of adopting the maximum VOC standards, in other words, the highest standards that we can take, because this is where we're going to be starting from. That'll give us some room so that later on, if we are moved up to serious non-attainment, then we have some room to put into place some more stringent standards. And so we are going to start where EPA says that we is the minimum of what we have to put into place. The area that's going to be covered by this rule is all of Clark County. The non-attainment area is not all of Clark County. It's just this area right here where the Las Vegas Valley exists. However, in order to make sure that those that are selling, supplying, offering for sale, or manufacturing and then distributing, if they only try to control those in this area, then we have problems with products that do not comply being sent into Mesquite out here, to Prim and areas down here, down into Laughlin, Bullhead City, and even into Boulder City that's right here. And those would lead to causing a problem with our ability to comply with the rules we have in place. So therefore, we are going to make this countywide to ensure our ability to enforce the rule and get the best control so that we can take care of bringing the emissions down. Proposed regulations are being set to make sure that no one that sells or manufactures any of these architectural and industrial coatings, if it's being manufactured and sent into Clark County, it has to meet the standards that are in this rule. If it's being sent into the county to be mixed and repackaged and then sent out of the county for other things, that is allowed. That isn't one of the exemptions that we have. And if the manufacturers have taken precautions to make sure that their products are not distributed in the county, then of course they can continue to produce materials that are not consistent with this rule, as long as they can demonstrate to the department that these will not be used within Clark County. Also, we have exempted containers of these different coatings that are 1 liter or less. That way, the smaller bottles, cans, whatever it is that you purchase it in, will be able to be used in these small sets. However, if you're buying a package of 6 of these, this exemption does not necessarily cover that. But if you're buying 1, then it's okay. But if you're buying more than that, then this rule will apply. Okay, this does not impact aerosol coatings. It does not impact coatings that are added at factories or at the work sites here in Clark County. And of course, it does not impact the colorants that are sold at the point of sale that will be used in the fields and on the jobs for mixing into the different paints and such. The standards are the standards that are the basic ones that are in the OTC rules that EPA has put out for guidance. As you can see here, this is given in 2 different ways so that it's easier to make your decisions based upon how it's listed on the cans. These are just the different usages and the different types of materials that are identified in the documents that EPA has provided us. As I've done some research, there are some of the newer OTC guidance documents that have additional compounds and also have much lower VOC content limits. But we are starting with what EPA has provided us, and so we are not adding those at this time. So if you see a difference and something is missing, it's for that purpose. Also, when it comes to the flammable and extremely flammable multi-purpose solvents and thinners, those are not to be sold in Clark County once this rule becomes effective. The exception to that, of course, is if it contains less than 1% by weight of aromatic compounds, or it contains methylene chloride, perchloroethylene, or trichloroethylene in a combination equal to or less than 0.01% by weight. Also, it must have meet the labeling requirements that are within this rule. There is a reporting requirement. In this particular case, I've still got 90 days here because we're going to have a discussion. The rule, as we received it, has 180 days to give us some guidance on how long to allow for a company to collect all this information. I did notice that in the consumer products rules, it was 90 days. In the AIMS rule, it's 180 days. So we would be very interested in any comments that you would have if we just made this consistent across the board for these two rules. So please, if you have any concerns or if you have any comments, just let us know what your thoughts are. The emission reduction benefits that we're hoping to get from this, as Jody had indicated, we are under a lot of pressure due to the fact that we were notified that we are now officially in the Federal Register non-attainment, moderate non-attainment as of January 4th. And of course, in that notice, it says, and we had to start demonstrating on January 1st that we're going to be in compliance, which basically doesn't give us any time to get down to the 0.7 ppm or the 70 ppb that is the standard. Therefore, we are proposing a very, very aggressive standard, which we've been made aware may be too aggressive, but it's something that we will be discussing. The earliest date that this rule will be able to be made enforceable based upon our best calculations is going to be July 4th of this year. By enacting these standards earlier than July 4th, that could help us to meet or demonstrate to EPA that these rules are in place, and that allows us to take credit for these for this year, and thereby it can help us to move into a better position to defend ourselves with regards to demonstrating that this year we can show that we are becoming compliant. In order to do this, because of it being July 4th and our ozone season is from May until September, if we can get the sources that are selling or distributing into the county to limit what they are providing to the county to what is in this rule before it becomes enforceable, we are asking for a voluntary enforcement of that by the distributors and the sellers. We do understand that there are already these products on the shelves, and of course the rule does give some instructions on how to deal with that. Failure to demonstrate the progress in 2023 will result or can result in us being changed from moderate to serious non-attainment, which will put into place even more stringent rules than what we're already looking at, and also affect many of the larger stationary sources that are located here in Las Vegas, in the Las Vegas Valley and throughout Clark County. This will require more stringent reductions in the VOC generating products, of course, that we're talking about today. Now, the vast majorities of the consumer products and the AIMS products are already commercially available here in Las Vegas. We can see those on the shelves now, and so we're not sure exactly how many of the products are not already compliant. We would like some information from those that have information so that we can better make our decisions as to how quickly this can be implemented. But that's something that we're hoping to get from those that are involved. Also, we have proposed a 30-day after the adoption date where manufacturers will need to have started reformulating their coatings and to get everything ready so that what's being distributed will be able to be done within 30 days after the rule. And yes, we have been made aware that that's very, very aggressive. Also, with regards to the reformulating of the coatings, we would like those that have information to provide it to us, to give us an idea as to what would be involved in this reformulating, to see if we need to address that separately within the rule, as far as how long it's going to take to do that. So, in other words, we are looking for a lot more information so that this rule will be as good and useful as it possibly can. The sell-through provisions, of course, are the standard ones for the OTC rules, and that is that whatever is manufactured prior to the effective date of the rule would have to be sold, supplied, or offered for sale up to 30 days after the effective date. And then after that, then they would not be able to be sold. Same thing with the colorants that are manufactured. They will have to be done within the 30 days. This provision does not apply to those coatings and colorants that do not have the date stamp or a date code. If there is no way to tell when these have been produced, manufactured, so that we can see if they are compliant, then any of those are not to be sold within the county. Only those products that have a date of manufacture or a date code are allowed to be sold. Now, some of the questions that we're hoping that you can answer for us are, of course, are there any other state rules that would serve as a better model for the OTC rule that we're talking about? Yesterday, we were told about the Colorado rules, which some of the participants yesterday had assisted in making. I have looked at those, and I do like the structure very much, but it indicates, at least on the internet, that those are phase 5 rules, and it looks like they are covering other compounds that are not in the version that we currently have. So any information you can give us would be appreciated. Also, is there a sell-through timeline? We know this is considered too aggressive. What would be the best? I know most people would say, let's just do the 3 years, but if we do that, then we may just as well just tell EPA, mark us serious, and just start going down that road, and we'll implement the most stringent rules right now. We do not want to do that, so if it can be something a little more reasonable in the 3 years, we really would like to hear. And also, how much reformulating of products will there need to be done? Given that 9 states have already adopted this, I know that there are specialty products that are available where certain distributors and manufacturers only sell to certain parts of the country. This may need to be looked at. So any information you can provide us on these things would be greatly appreciated. And lastly, this is the timeline for the rulemaking. The workshop is being done today, February 8th. We were asking that all comments, written comments, be provided by March 1st, so that we'll be able to pull those comments together, make whatever changes we need to the rule, to make it the best rule that we can before we put it into public notice, so that we can get ready to send it to the board. We are aware that this first draft of the rule is going to give some people a lot of heartburn, but in many ways it's intended to, so that we can get some good feedback from the public, so that that will help us to make the best rule for everybody to live by that we possibly can. Now I'm going to turn the time over to Araceli for her to continue on from here.
Hello everyone. Good morning. Richard, we did receive a couple questions, and so I'm going to go ahead and read some of these questions and allow you to respond. And I will probably everybody's muted right now except the presenters, but I will go ahead and release the microphone for Rhett Cash. He's the one who's asking these questions, just in case he needs to clarify. But in the meantime, I'll read the questions, let you answer, and then we can let Rhett chime in as needed. Bear with me one moment, please. Rhett, are you able to speak, just to let me know that you can, that your microphone is working?
Can you hear me?
Yes. Okay.
Awesome.
So I'll go ahead and read some of your questions. But the first one was, are we targeting implementation of the OTC Phase 1 model rule for AIMS or Phase 2 model rules?
All of the modeling was done on Phase 2. Initially, we thought that we were looking at Phase 4, but as I was looking last night, it looks like we may be actually presenting Phase 2 right now. I've still got to do a little bit more research to make sure. The one that we're looking at is the guidance that's dated 2014 that was sent out by EPA. And so if that is Phase 4, then that's what we're using. But as I said, I looked at some rules last night that said they were Phase 4, and clearly what those were much more aggressive than what we're proposing.
So just to clarify really quickly, OTC does not have a Phase 4 model rule for AIM. They only have a Phase 1 and Phase 2 model rule for AIM. I think you might be confusing that with consumer products, which does
Okay,
have a
that was probably consumer products then.
Okay.
The phase, so then it'll be Phase 2. That's what
AIM.
Yes.
Which is the more aggressive one. So I guess I'm a little bit confused with.
Well, then I'm confused too.
That
I know that the one that we have received is the least aggressive one.
Okay, then that would be hopefully the OTC Phase 1. You flipped through the slides really quickly, so I couldn't see some of the categories and limits that you're looking for. So when the presentation is available, okay, I guess you're going to it now. Let's see.
Well, if you can see, those. If you need me to switch to the next slide, I can do that.
If you just stay here, that would be great. Thank you. Yeah, it looks like these are the OTC Phase 1.
Okay.
Well, maybe not. Can you go back one slide? Sorry, to the flat, non-flat. Never mind, that would be the OTC Phase 2. Okay, that's the more aggressive one for AIM.
Okay.
And we would encourage the OTC Phase 1 model rule limits. And then I know that you were discussing contingency measures. And if you don't get your emissions reductions down, including the OTC Phase 2 model rule limits, which are more stringent, that would be a good contingency measure, at least from industry's perspective, if that's necessary, if you need future emissions reductions.
Okay, I'll go online and see what I can find on the Phase 1 and then do some comparisons, and then we'll discuss what we want to do there.
Okay,
because
great.
we only want to start where we need to start in order to actually match the modeling that we're currently doing, because we've got a lot of work into that. And if it's Phase 1 on the AIMS, then that's what we want to put out. So thank you for pointing that out.
course. And my second, I guess, entry in the chat is more of just a statement, and I can provide these in written comment form as well to you guys, but that's just giving you a heads up that the proposed compliance date of July, or I'm kind of not really understanding completely and fully for the compliance date, if it's July 2023 or 30 days after for compliance, but that's really not practical from an industry perspective. We need at least 1 year from the date of adoption of a final rule for the compliance date typically. So this is really concerning from industry's perspective. And I've stated the reasons why in the chat, and I will provide them in written comments as well.
We do appreciate that. This is pretty much the same thing we were hearing yesterday as well.
Okay. Yeah, and this 3-year, finally, just the 3-year sell-through provision is necessary for similar reasons for the compliance date. But again, I'll provide that all in written comments. When do you want, like, do I just send them to you? I know that you had kind of a timeline of when you're accepting formal comments, but if you want informal comments, I'm more than happy to provide those as soon as you want them or need them.
The sooner the better.
Okay.
If you can send them today or by Monday, that will, I'm going to be leaving for a while after this next week. So anything that I get that I can work on next week would be great, because I'll be turning it over to someone else to work on for a little while after that.
Okay, I'll try and get them to you as quickly as I can. Thank you for that.
Thank you. We had another question that I believe Jody has answered, but let me go ahead and read it and then see if we need to elaborate. It's from Patrick Geiske. And let me go ahead and unmute you, Patrick, just so, or enable you to unmute yourself. Patrick asked, has Clark County contacted EPA regarding their NOx inventory? As the industry has found in California, the reduction in VOC has not had an impact on air quality based on the amount of NOx that is generated by automobiles. And Jody's response was, yes, we have had discussions with EPA on NOx emissions, and those are being considered as well for attainment purposes. The moderate non-attainment requires a 15% VOC reduction, no matter if it impacts that attainment or not. Patrick?
The only thing I would add to that is just basically consistent with what Jody's already said. We're required by EPA to address the 15% reduction in VOCs, which is the purpose of the AIMS rule and the commercial coatings rule. So that's why those are being put in place. A lot of our studies that we've been doing on ozone indicates that yes, the NOx is going to be a much more important constituent in the ozone. And so we are going to be looking at that as, we are looking at that right now, and we'll be looking to see if there's going to have to be both NOx and VOCs or just NOx. But we do have to do this because EPA says that this is required.
Yes.
Patrick? Okay, yeah, if you want to,
Yeah,
if you have any.
I'm on. I was just waiting for him to finish up. And really, my name is Pat Gieske. I'm the technical director for Seymour Sycamore. I was on the call yesterday, and I know some of the comments, and a comment was made today about the date coding. I know that in the various regulations that are out there now with California and some of the other states, that if you don't use either a Julian date code or a standard date code, then as long as company supplies your department with an explanation of what the date code system is, would that be amenable to your trying to figure out what the date code or the limiting of not selling product off the shelf. That's one of the issues that they have. And again, I agree with everybody else, is a very aggressive timeline, which I'm very surprised that EPA would, have you just within this short period of time do this, since we've worked with EPA in the past and, trying to, get rules in place for the state implementation plans so we can lower products. I guess my biggest issue with everything is, what is the inventory of both the VOCs that are being put out or sold within the state of Nevada, along with the NAAQS inventory? Because we do know from the state of California that no matter what we do from a VOC perspective and lowering the VOCs, it's all based on NAAQS. NAAQS are actually driving the whole ozone issue in many parts of the state of California. And would Nevada look at doing some kind of survey to figure out what those tonnages or what you would have for VOC and NOx?
I can't speak for specifically what we're going to do. That's going to be a decision for our planning group, but we too are very aware that the VOCs are not. Right. We have a lot of VOCs in the Las Vegas Valley, and it seems that when we have something happen where we have wind or something blowing NOx in from other sources, all of a sudden we get a huge spike in ozone. So there are indicators that, yes, you're right, the ozone is a huge thing. You have to have the ozone and the NOx and the VOCs, but my understanding is it depends on which is the greater of the two, and you have to figure out what is the limiting agent and control that. If you can control the limiting agent, then you can control the ozone. So there is going to have to be some research on what exactly is the inventory of both, so that you can see that. But looking at the data that we've got, or what we're seeing is happening on those days, it does appear that you're correct. We're seeing the same thing that California sees, but we still have to deal with the VOCs, because that's what the power that be requires us to do.
I guess one of the other questions I have, especially with EPA, is EPA willing to work with the state of Nevada to, I know you're looking for a July date, which is like, I won't say impossible. But again, my comments from yesterday is to try to communicate this program after it's been finally approved. You're only talking of 2 to 3 weeks. And then how do you get the supply chain to follow that without, and I'm going to use the term good communication. And I know yesterday you were talking about public notices in the paper and stuff, but to tell you the truth, I don't think people read them. I don't believe that anybody on this call believes that people will see those in papers, even though they've been published. And then how do you really get that communication out? And is EPA willing to work with the state of Nevada to try to see what you already have there from a SIP reduction, I guess?
And hi, Patrick, this is Jody. I'll jump in. So It's not the state of Nevada, it is Clark County. So we we are the air pollution control agency for Clark County. We did receive some feedback about, when we can certainly pass on to the state and Washoe County, any desire for consistency in rules, but that would be up to the Nevada Division of Environmental Protection in Washoe County if they wanted to adopt similar rules that we are pursuing. We have expressed concern to the EPA with this timeline. We wrote comments, and when they posted it in the Federal Register, they have not indicated that they are willing to budge on the dates, thus this aggressive timeline. But we are hearing, and this is what we're having these workshops for, the concern with this, aggressive schedule and how it, for under these particular rules, how it would impact industry. And we will be taking that into consideration and being as flexible as possible. So as we're still gathering this information, we're going to do our best to address the comments and adjust timelines. But as you can appreciate, we don't have a lot of wiggle room, but we don't want to, destroy industry either. So we definitely hear you. We definitely encourage you to discuss informally with Richard or our other, the other folks that may be helping us develop the rules, depending on which rule you're interested in, and then again, formal comments, so we can take those into consideration as we develop these. But trust us, we're doing our best, and we understand and expected this sort of feedback. So this is the sort of thing we're looking to hear, so we can do our best to incorporate these comments and give as much time as possible given the constraints we're under.
Yeah, I guess the question, it boils down to EPA is based on where your VOC limit is currently, which I'm assuming it's under the EPA limits. And there are probably a lot of products that are being sent into Clark County that are well below that limit and probably well below the limit that you're going to implement. And then the question is, how can the county get those SIP credits right now to, potentially have an extended implementation date?
Okay, well, thank you for that input. And in the interest of time, we need to move on to our next presentation. Again, we should have some time after that presentation to continue to discuss this, and willing to discuss offline as well. So I don't mean to discourage the conversation, but we do have one more presentation to get to.
All right.
Lynn Hutchinson. Oh, I'm sorry. Go ahead, Patrick.
No, thank you.
Okay, yeah. Please stay on though, or get in touch with us offline. But Lynn Hutchinson is going to talk about industrial cleaning solvents as one of the other rules we're considering. So we'll move into that. But please continue to provide your input through the chat until our next discussion time. Thank you.
Thank you, Jody. As Jody introduced me, I'm Lynn Hutchinson. I'm a consultant with RTP Environmental Associates, working with Clark County to prepare their attainment plan. And I'm going to talk to you today about the Industrial Cleaning Solvents CTG. So EPA issued this cleaning solvent rule recommendations in 2006. And when I'm done speaking, I'm going to go ahead and put the links for the CTG into the chat of the webinar. And I'll also put a link in there for EPA's alternative control technology document, which is another resource that EPA put together to understand the industry and potentially available control emission reduction technologies. So the industrial solvent cleaning source category includes users of solvent cleaning products. These solvents can have varying VOC contents in them and therefore varying VOC emissions potential. The solvents are used for a variety of purposes, but mainly to clean and remove things such as adhesives, inks, paints, dirt, soils, and grease from parts, products, or other equipment. The main source of emissions for the industrial cleaning solvents source category is spills and evaporation. And I'm going to talk about the emission points and sources in more detail as we move through this presentation. In the alternative control technology document, EPA explains that there are 3 ways in which industry typically uses these industrial cleaning solvents. They're either used in the manufacturing process, they're used to clean up the manufacturing process line, so it's the process equipment, or they can also be used to prepare a piece of equipment or part for further maintenance, because you want to get rid of everything on that part before you send the part into maintenance. EPA's document further classified this into kind of 9 categories of cleaning operations, which I have listed here. And in the alternative control technology document, EPA provided this great visual to break out the percentage those cleaning operations are of the source category. So you can tell from this visual that the main source of industrial solvent cleaning usage is for cleaning spray guns. And then the second highest usage is for cleaning spray booths. So a heavy use in the spraying arena. EPA identified 5 methods for actually cleaning. The first being dipping, which is exactly what it sounds like. You've got a bucket or other container which you put the part into, and you swish the solvent around, or you swish the part around to actually clean the part with the solvent in the container. Emission points include evaporation when the container is open. And then something that EPA terms drag out emissions, which if you can envision when you stick the part into a bucket and then you pull it out, the part is dripping with solvent. So that creates emissions as it evaporates into the air. And then also as the part dries, that is evaporation. EPA's termed that drag out emissions. Another source is that at some point the solvent in the bucket is going to become so contaminated that it cannot be used anymore. And we need to dispose of that solvent. And depending on the methods used for disposal, that can be a source of emissions. Another method is flushing, which is using a pump to create a velocity to send the solvent through a hosing system to flush out the external or internal parts of equipment. Emissions occur from equipment leaks in the flushing system itself, waste solvent handling, again, having to dispose of the used solvent, and evaporation from the storage reservoir. Purging is very similar to flushing, but it's removing solvent from the internal parts of equipment. The emission sources and points are very similar to flushing, so I'm not going to get into that in any great detail. Spraying uses a force of momentum to coat the inner or outer surface of equipment or parts to clean them. Emissions occur when the solvent evaporates from the part or equipment, that drag out kind of emissions that I talked about, and also equipment leaks from the spraying system and storage of the solvent. Finally, wiping, at least back in 2006 when EPA put the CTG together, was found to be the most commonly used method for applying and using industrial cleaning solvents. This method, however, relies on an applicator, usually termed rags, that become latent with the solvent. As the rags dry, VOC evaporates into the air. This method also results in emissions from spilling, because as you can imagine, as you pour solvent onto the rag, some solvent will not get onto the rag and instead be spilled. Finally, as you've seen in other methods, emission points also result from storing and drying of the part. So those are similar emission points as well. EPA's CTG recommends applying the industrial solvent cleaning CTG to source categories emitting greater than 3 tons per year of emissions from use of cleaning solvents. And EPA notes that this is an uncontrolled estimate as opposed to a controlled estimate. DAQ believes that for this particular industry, with work practice being probably the most prevalent form of control and estimating potential emission reductions, we think that applying this on an actual emissions basis makes more sense. So we would propose to put the 3 ton per year applicability threshold into the rule based on actual emissions. EPA CTG recommends 4 work practice requirements, the first being to cover open containers and used applicators. The second is to minimize air circulation around your cleaning operations. So this means that you should not be using high ventilation fan systems in the area of the cleaning, because that high velocity movement of air promotes more evaporation and increases emissions. Also, the CTG recommends disposing of those used solvent rags or shop towels in a environmentally friendly way. So you're not going to just leave those rags and towels out on the ground to dry, where all of the solvent will basically wind up into the air. Instead, you're going to use closed containers and follow a proper method for disposal. Finally, the CTG recommends implementing equipment practices that minimize emissions, such as, if this is an art area, keeping the art cleaners covered when not in use, and maintaining clean equipment to repair the solvent leaks to reduce the equipment leak losses. EPA's CTG also includes emissions limitations. The first is a solvent VOC content limit less than or equal to 50 grams of VOC per liter of solvent. Alternatively, rather than a VOC content limit, because that limit cannot be met for solvents for all types of applications, if you're using it in an application that you need a higher VOC content, then EPA's CTG recommends an 85% control efficiency control technology. Then EPA also included an alternative composite vapor pressure limit in the CTG. And it said that this limit of 8 millimeters of mercury at 20 degrees Celsius could be applied either as an alternative to the control technology and VOC content limit, or in addition to, at the state's option. Now, I want to note that Clark County does have a solvent rule that is already approved into Clark County State Implementation Plan, and that rule applies countywide. The rule basically reads, however, as a complete prohibition of emissions from the types of emission discharges we've been talking about today. And then it also says that the division can impose a particular control technology on a source to reduce emissions. This is former Rule 60.1.1. I say former rule because in 2011, the county commissioners removed this rule from Clark County's regulation. This means that although it remains in the state implementation plan and it is enforceable by the US EPA, DAQ is not enforcing the rule. And therefore, at this time, as we evaluate what's in the emissions inventory, DAQ is considering that rule 60.11 has no effectiveness because it cannot assure continuous compliance at the moment with the rule, since DAQ is not enforcing it. This rule, however, we want to note, could serve in combination with perhaps issuance of control technology guidance to industry on methods that should be used to minimize emissions as satisfying the RACT rule. This approach is less desirable to DAQ because, as I pointed out, The rule itself seems a little contradictory in writing a prohibition against emissions and at the same time saying and admitting that those emissions occur so that a control technology could be imposed to minimize the emissions. Also, because it is already a rule that's in the state implementation plan, and even though DAQ does not believe that there is continuous compliance with that rule at the moment because DAQ is not enforcing it, DAQ is unsure whether EPA would allow any emission reductions credit to be taken for reestablishing that rule in the county because it's supposed to already be applying. The rule is, as I said, contradictory, and so at this point, we are recommending moving forward with replacing this existing rule with a rule that follows more closely with EPA's CTG recommendations. Did I skip a slide? Nope. All right, so in the materials we distributed today is the rule from Texas CTG rule for industrial solvent cleaning. This rule closely parallels EPA's CTG RAC requirements, and DAQ is requesting feedback on the suitability of this rule to model for DAQ Clark County's rule. The rule would apply to the entirety of Clark County and not just HA 212. The Texas rule also goes beyond the RAC recommendations by prescribing specific monitoring, record keeping, testing, reporting, and notification requirements, or sometimes referred to as MRR requirements. EPA's CTG RAC guidelines generally don't get beyond recommending the level of emissions control to the provisions of what should apply for and say that really 5 times fast, the MRR requirements. So DAQ is requesting comment on whether Texas' approach to those requirements is appropriate, or perhaps there's another state who has better models for applying those requirements. There are also some other noteworthy provisions in the Texas rule. The rule contains a once in, always in provision that basically says, if on the effective date you have to comply with this rule, you have to continue to comply with the rule unless you come in and get a permit for an emissions reduction project that proves that you're going to take these emissions from your solvents below the applicability thresholds on a permanent basis. This was Texas' approach with dealing with the fact that the types of solvents used in operations and the quantity used in any given year can vary, and they didn't want to or felt it was difficult to try to enforce sources who might be above the applicability thresholds in one year and below the next. So DAQ is requesting comment on whether this once in, always in approach in the Texas rule would work for Clark County. And if not, we request commenters provide other options for dealing with the shifts in solvent usage and type and quantity from year to year. The Texas rule provided 15 months for existing sources to come into compliance with the rule. As has been discussed over and over again, DAQ really needs to see emission reductions in 2023 in order to have any hope of affecting the attainment demonstration that has to come in 2024. Given this, and we're hoping with the passage of time that a lot of the solvents that are already being used in Clark County would meet the VOC content limits. But we're requesting comments on that and how long we should allow for the compliance date under the rule. Now, as I looked at the Texas rule, it did not have sell-through provisions, and it did not have user use provisions, because we recognize that some of the solvent may be already on the shelves and stocked, at the industrial sources. And we certainly don't want to create a rule where those things that have already been purchased and are sitting on a shelf are not used or disposed of in a manner that is not environmentally appropriate. So we are requesting comment. We're imagining that the 15 months that Texas applied allowed for adequate users to get rid of what they have in stock and also to change off the inventory. But again, we are time challenged here and request comments on these issues. Another area we're requesting comment on is exemptions. EPA's CTG rule included 2 recommended exemptions beyond that 3 ton per year use level that I already talked about. One is it said that the rule should exempt any product category listed for regulation under Clean Air Act Section 183E. And I'm just going to hop forward to the next slide where I have listed for your reference those things that were listed for regulation under 183E. So industries on this list or the operations on this list, we would intend to exclude from the Industrial Cleaning Solvents CTG. The other area that EPA recommended for exclusion or exemption from the rule is use of industrial cleaning solvents for janitorial purposes, such as cleaning offices, cleaning bathrooms, or other kinds of areas would be exempt from this CTG. The Texas rule also includes an aerosol can exemption, where if a particular user uses less than 160 fluid ounces a day, which is approximately 1.25 gallons of aerosol cans solvent, they would be exempt from the standard. DAQ proposes to include a similar exemption in the Clark County rule, but requests comment on that. And finally, as I looked around at a number of rules across the country, I found commonality in the exemptions that other states apply. And I've listed those here. I think there's about 8 categories that other states have commonly included in their industrial cleaning solvent VOC RACT rules. So we are proposing to include those exemptions, but request comment. Finally, there's one other area that we're specifically requesting comment on. As you know, DAQ has been time stressed to put these things together, and the level of coordination and research that we would have liked done before we're standing before you at a stakeholder meeting is to make sure that we're not putting anything out there that is unnecessarily duplicative to other regulatory requirements. And we would specifically, if a commenter already is looking at what I've just gone through and going, well, that would be covered in the AIM rule, or that would be covered in the consumer products rule, or that's already covered by EPA rules that are out there, we would really appreciate you pointing that out to us and also recommending a way to resolve those unnecessary duplications. Should, instead of regulating or setting a different industrial solvent cleaning CTG, should we rely on the AIM rule or the consumer rules as the to meet the RACT requirement in addition to the ROP requirements that those rules are targeted for? So with that, I am going to turn it back over to Araceli to go over the proposed rulemaking timeline.
Thank you, Lynn. And as Richard pointed out earlier, we're pointing out the same timeline that he alluded to. This would be the earliest we would try to adopt these rules would be July 4th. And so we would have the consumer products. Lynn, can you share your slide
back? I'm so sorry. I was
okay.
Moving you to enlarge you and I unshared. Hopefully it's back up again.
Yes, we're good. Okay. And so, yes, this is the workshop should be February 9th, but the comments, we are looking for written comments by March 1st, and then we would begin a 30-day public notice, and then the public notice period would end on May 9th. And then we would go ahead and submit it for BCC before a Board of County Commissioners for hearing and adoption on June 20th and the rule effective date would be July 4th. Now, this would be the soonest that we would be looking to adopt this rule. And I'm going to go ahead and share my screen because I have a couple follow-up slides. Can you see my slides? Nope.
Yeah,
Yep. Okay, good.
there we go. Yeah.
Okay. So yes, so as I said, that the earliest we would be planning to adopt these rules would be July 4th. And given the deadlines that EPA has placed on us, we're adopting this fast-paced schedule, and we need to have them adopted so that they would produce emission reductions for the 2023 ozone season. Again, we'll consider all comments that we received today and the written ones that we received by March 1st. I just want to remind everyone that those who have registered for our respective distribution lists, you'll continue to receive updates on any distribution lists for any of the controls you signed up for. And you can follow the developments of our attainment on the website indicated on this slide. And I believe Jody posted it into the link earlier. And in closing, we just want to say that we're going to continue to engage the industry and also clean air advocates in our development of our state implementation plan, the attainment SIP for our moderate classification. And I will go ahead and post a link to each of these contacts that are identified here, and you can reach out to any of us with your questions. And just finally, again, if you're not on a distribution list and you were forwarded an invite to this meeting from somebody else, please go ahead and reach out to Alejandro and he will add you to our stakeholder list. And with that, I have nothing further. Does anybody else have any questions? Let's see, oh, looks like there might be something in the chat. No, I think we're all good. Let's see. Let me
Gary
yeah.
just had his hand up.
Yeah, let me go ahead and actually, yeah, I'll go ahead and enable your mic, Gary, and you should be able to speak now.
Oh, great. Thank you. Some questions on the industrial solvent cleaning. I'm a little confused in the material that was sent out prior to the meeting. There was the Texas rule was provided as an attachment. And so is that the rule that you're considering going to be modeled after the Texas rule?
That is a question, because as I looked around to a lot of state rules, a lot of the state rules had variations from what EPA had recommended. And Texas I found to be the closest in the way they structured the rule to EPA's CTG guideline document, with the exception noted of their testing, monitoring, record keeping, and notification requirements. So that is the rule right now that we are looking to model after, but we're requesting comment. And if you know of a better rule out there, please let us know.
Yeah, I have to look at the Michigan rule. Michigan's going through rulemaking right now, and they did adopt an industrial solvent cleaning rule, I believe, and I can look around to see if there's any other ones that might make sense. My other observation is on the exemptions, which I work at Printing United Alliance. So we did submit comments to Texas on this rule, and they adopted the exemptions for printing operations, except there's one that's missing. But when you look at the CTG that EPA issued, and we had asked EPA to include this in that CTG, is that if your cleaning solvent operations were covered by another CTG, then you should be excluded from this CTG. And the print process category that's missing is offset with litho printing. But I know that there's a graphic arts workshop, I believe, on Monday, where offset litho is going to get a regulation based on the CTG. So that makes a lot of sense. And I would strongly suggest that you write a provision into the rule that you ultimately adopt that says if it's covered by somewhere else in our rules, you don't have to follow this. It's because you end up with conflicting requirements. And I know in the litho CTG, there are specific limits in there for cleaning solvents that are used. So same as the other exemptions.
Right.
So,
Right.
so
That would be our intention, that we don't want to create duplicative requirements out there for sources.
because they end up overlapping, and Wisconsin did that and they created a mess. And it took them a while to undo that mess. And it created tremendous confusion in the regulated community as to, and actually permit writers in enforcement personnel, because they're like, what limit do we enforce? You've got conflicting limits. So you've got to be really careful with some of these CTGs when you have potentially overlapping requirements, to make sure that the exemptions are clear, that you're subject to, especially if you're subject to limits on one rule, you should not be subject to limits on a second rule. But I'll see if I can suggest, I'll look around and see if I can suggest a model rule. I mean, at first glance, this rule looks good. Like I said, we submitted comments on this rule, and I'll see if I can't find something else to share with you.
Right. I'd appreciate that as soon as you can get it to us.
Sure.
Are there any other questions out there? Araceli, you want to take back?
Yeah, I think I'm not seeing anything else. I'm going to go ahead and put contact information in the link. And like we have said, is to please reach out to any of the three of us that are on this contact list. And if we can't answer your questions, we will direct you to the person that can. And we look forward to, hearing further from anybody on your input and anything that you want us to consider during this rulemaking process. And with that, is there any further comments from internal staff, or are we, is that it for now? I think we're good. Like we said, go ahead and follow us on our website. We'll be posting meeting materials either later this week or early next week, and we'll continue to update that website as often as possible as things begin to unfold.
Thank you, everybody. Have a good day.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Okay, bye.